Now, this particular module is called Creating Customers for Life. You can do everything it takes to master the straight line system and perfect your inner gaming success as well. But if you don't end up keeping the sales you've made, or better still, turning those sales into additional sales, which includes generating a consistent stream of referrals from your customers, then you're making your life a hell of a lot harder than it has to be. You see, of all the things I can teach you to ramp up your sales results, the easiest way for me teach you to put a whole lot more money in your pocket and to have a whole lot less stress in your life while you're doing it is to learn how to first hold on to your customers once you close them so you don't get cancellations, and then second, take as many of those customers as possible and build them into long-term relationships, or as the phrase goes, create customers for life. Now, if you have even the slightest bit of experience either in business or as a salesperson, then you're painfully aware of how much it costs to get a new customer and how much energy it takes in all levels. Everything from having to develop a kick-ass marketing campaign, to sifting through the leads, to capturing someone's attention on the phone, to then actually getting yourself in front of the person to make your presentation. Essentially, all that stuff that has to happen before you even have a shot of the prospect saying yes is typically the most expensive aspect of any company's business. And in fact, in a lot of cases, it's what ends up driving a company out of business. So what this module is about is providing you with some really powerful yet really simple strategies that help you get a ton more sales from your existing customer base, and if necessary, stop any bleeding you're currently experiencing in the form of customer churn. Now, in straight line terminology, the way you go about doing this is by making sure that once you get your prospect to move past their action threshold and you get them to buy, you need to make sure that first, you keep them past their action threshold over time, and I'll tell you how to do that in a moment. And then second, I want you to learn to actually permanently lower their action threshold, albeit only as it relates to you. In other words, when they deal with other salespeople, their action threshold will still be way up there, right? But when they deal with you, their action threshold will be much, much lower. And the way you do that is to turn them into raving fans of these three things. And by the way, it should come as no surprise to you what these three things are. They're the three tens. You want to turn them into raving fans of your product, you want to turn them into raving fans of you, and you want to turn them into raving fans of your company, the three tens. Now, for starters, this means making sure that you keep track and keep all your promises. Essentially, you follow through, and you treat your customers with the highest level of ethics integrity at all times. Now, there are three things we're going to cover in this session. First, we'll go over what you can do immediately after the sale to lock things in and set the stage for a lifelong relationship. Two, then I'll actually walk you through strategies for getting customers for life, strategies you can and should use as part of your everyday sales process. And by the way, how you handle your interactions after the sale affects your reputation as a salesperson in a massive way. I'll tell you, back in my Wall Street days, we had this saying. It said, good news travels fast, but bad news travels instantly. And that was before the internet. Nowadays, bad news not only travels instantly, but it travels virally. You get it? And when it comes to your reputation as a salesperson, it's exactly the case. If you develop a bad reputation of how you treat customers after the sale, you're totally, totally screwed. And all it takes is one angry customer to start blogging about you, and you'll find yourself either hiring one of those reputation management firms that specialize in removing negative Google posts, right? And they really don't work anyway. Or you'll be heading down to the local courthouse to change your name, okay? You get it? Not what you want to be doing. Your reputation is something that's really tough to change once it's been established, so you want to make sure that it gets built in a way that supports you. Now, finally, the third thing is I'll share some strategies to help you build a massive referral business. And that means lowering your lead costs dramatically. In other words, if you're getting referrals, you don't have to go out and buy leads, and typically those will be more qualified leads and a bit easier to close, and we'll explain that later, okay? So essentially, by making sure that your customers are satisfied at the highest possible level, it'll pay you back tenfold on so many different levels and throughout your entire sales career. So let's jump into the first part of the session now. Okay, now immediately after you close the sale, you need to essentially set the stage for a long-term relationship. Now remember, closing the sale is about getting the 5 elements of the straight line system to line up for a single moment in time. Essentially building up those 3 tens and then using the pain threshold, then if necessary, the action threshold to get someone to say yes, to get them to buy, right? Now once you close the sale, your job shifts to make sure that the certainty that you've built up continues to build over time so they continue to feel like they made the right decision. Now, to that end, there are three things you can do right away to help essentially wow your customers and to create a top-notch customer experience that will bind them to you for the long term. Now, let's go through them. Number one, first, you want to realize that when you get someone to say yes, that's just the beginning of the sale. It's not the end of the process. See, the biggest mistake that most salespeople make is that the moment they close the sale, they let their guard down. They drop their level of certainty. Their own state starts to sort of become more neutral, right? Essentially, they lower their energy level. In reality, what you need to do is the exact opposite. In other words, your goal is that when you close the sale, you want to immediately anchor your customer into this feeling that they've made the right decision. You want to give them the certainty that everything is going to continue to work out exactly as they envision it over the long term. And the way you do this is to use the moment when you actually get them to say yes. I want you to trigger yourself into a state of even higher certainty. In other words, you raise your energy level after the customer says yes versus lowering it, okay? So that's really essentially the beginning of you taking your state to an even higher level. Now, the second thing is you want to follow up the sale with a personal thank you note. And let me say this, writing thank you notes is a lost art. And because of that, handwritten notes make an even bigger impact than they ever have. In other words, people don't really get them anymore, so when they actually get one, they're blown away. Now, let me give you an example of this. I was out for lunch the other day with my book agent, a guy named Joel Gottler, great guy, good friend, and we were talking about a man named Michael Ovitz, who was a very famous agent in Hollywood at CA. He actually was the founder of CA. He was the first super agent, so to speak. And he doesn't have a very good reputation with people. He's sort of a very controversial, hard-edged character. And I asked Joel, it's like, Joel, I don't understand. Why is it, what was it essentially that made Mike Ovitz such a huge success, that made him essentially the agent to the stars? And Joel said, here's what it was, Jordan. This guy was the world's greatest ingratiator. I'm like, ingratiator? He goes, listen, he had a team of 4 people, assistants, which would sit around all day long and scour through the trades. And anytime he saw that someone got an award or received any type of reward, he would send them a congratulatory note or a small gift. And he'd write these really heartwarming notes as if he really cared, in spite of the fact that he had a reputation for having a heart made of stone. But because of these wonderfully ingratiating congratulatory notes, and by sending them out relentlessly again and again and again over time, people began to say, wow, he must really care about me, despite the fact he doesn't care about anybody else. And it worked. And he used this system of writing these ingratiating notes as one of the primary recruiting tools on his way to becoming the most powerful Hollywood agent in history. Okay, so don't underestimate the power of literally, a 3-sentence note to somebody after they've, have gotten the product that you sold them, whatever it might be that you're selling. And it's a heartwarming, emotional few sentences, and the impact it has on the person is staggering. Now, to do this effectively, essentially to become an expert ingratiator, to become an expert at sending out thank you notes, you have to, of course, gather massive intelligence. And of course, you can't, or really you don't want to do it the way that Michael Ovitz did it, where you have a team of people going out there and scouring the trade journals and the magazines and every publication, because in reality, it's a very expensive proposition for most salespeople who are getting started, right? Even advanced salespeople, in fact, it's a pretty expensive proposition. It's very, very complicated. So for right now, let's focus on using this technique of ingratiation, sending out thank you notes for people that you've already opened up as accounts, people you've just opened up. In other words, let's say you've just opened up a sale, and now it's time to use this tactic to build massive trust with the client. Now, for starters, if you've done your job right during the actual sale, then you've stuck to your straight line prospecting, and you'll have gathered tons of intelligence. Essentially, all the information you need to personalize a message to the customer. Now, to that end, if you've just closed the sale and you don't feel like you really have all the intelligence you need, what you can do is you go back into a revised qualification process, except this time you focus a bit more on their personal life. And what I call this is identifying someone's aliveness. So what makes them feel alive outside of work? In fact, remember during the rapport building module, we spoke about the fish on the wall, right? When you walk into someone's office and that big fish there, don't try to get into rapport by saying, oh, that's a nice fish, right? Every other salesperson walked in and said, that's a nice fish on the wall. That's not what generates rapport before you've closed the sale. However, after you've closed the sale, it's all about the fish. In other words, there's a shift, a fundamental shift from being strictly business to actually becoming a person who cares about the person's life. Okay, so again, that fish on the wall that was taboo before you closed the sale now becomes very pertinent after the sale. So when you're in this revised qualification process, you make this subtle shift to finding a bit more about the person's personal life. And then when you actually write the thank you note, or we'll talk about sending ethical gifts a bit later, you have something to go by, something that can really hit home with them and move them emotionally. Because the key to writing effective thank you notes is to move someone emotionally. Now, to be clear here, I want you to be sure to file this information away for later use at the appropriate time, whether it's a holiday, an anniversary, at a contract renewal, and so on. But the key is to actually use the information you gather. You write a thank you note or send a thank you gift where appropriate as a follow-up to the sale. Now, to do this effectively, there needs to be something that's specific to the customer. Here's an example. Let's say you're a financial planner and you've just closed a client and he has a daughter who's going to go to college one day. You say, "Dear John, thank you for entrusting me with your business. I look forward to helping you build your daughter Emily's college fund." That's just an example, and you go on a little bit after that, but that's an example of how you take a thank you note and personalize it to what matters most, essentially his daughter's education. So let me reiterate here. Number one was, when you close the sale, you don't drop your state, you actually elevate your state and anchor in that good feeling with your client. Number two was to send that thank you note, that powerful thank you note, using some emotional tugs on his heartstrings. And now is number three, the third key here is immediately after you close the sale, is to follow up personally to make sure that everything is turning out exactly as planned during the actual sales conversation. In other words, this is about ensuring relationship integrity, taking responsibility to make sure that your customer actually gets exactly what he or she was promised. See, the danger zone in most businesses happens at this point, where there's a handoff, when the salesperson turns over a new customer to the product fulfillment department. This is an area where it's so easy to have a huge impact with very little effort. All you need to do is to make sure the product is being fulfilled as promised and to check in with your client when the appropriate time comes. Now, what's important here is to not try to upsell your client every single time you talk to them. In other words, just check in with them periodically, and this will ingratiate them to you. In other words, don't make it so every time you call, it's a sales call. You have what's called schmooze calls, where you just call up, ask them how things are going, if everything is okay, if you can help them in any way, and that call goes a long way to establishing trust and building the long-term relationship. And take ownership, by the way, of their satisfaction. You know, if they're feeling good, take ownership yourself. And if something isn't right, make sure that you take ownership of any dissatisfaction they might have with your business. Don't pass the buck. If something isn't right, you follow up directly with the person in your organization who can help fix it. Don't just tell your customer, "Yeah, I'll call this person and they'll take care of it, and let me know if you still have any problems after that." That's not the sort of behavior that's going to create a customer for life. You need to follow up with them yourself to make sure any challenges they might be facing have been taken care of. That's the kind of personal attention that goes a long way towards creating a relationship that's going to continue to grow over time. Now, one final note here, and it has to do with the power of language. And I touched on this in detail during the looping module, and I'm sure you've been through that by now, because typically this is one of the last modules that everyone goes through. So what I talk about in looping is that certain language patterns will create an unconscious emotional feeling in someone that can either move them in the right direction or, of course, in the wrong direction. Now, in the case of after the sale, there's one specific language pattern that makes an absolutely huge difference in how your customer perceives you. When your customer asks you a question or there's any sort of problem, there's a huge difference to you saying, "I need to get back to you," or "I have to get back to you," versus "I'd be glad to get back to you." See, that language pattern, "I'd be glad to get back to you," is very, very powerful because it shows the customer that you're not doing it as an obligation, but it's something that you actually embrace. And it just goes a really long way towards essentially painting the picture in the customer's mind that you're going to hold their hand every step of the way, and you'll do it gladly, not grudgingly. So those are the three things you must do immediately post-sale. First, remember, keep your state up, right, so that you build momentum past the point of the sale when you close. That's number one. Number two, send an effective and specific, thoughtful thank you note to your client, and put in there some language patterns that will create an emotional response, not like, "Dear John, thanks for the sale, Jordan." I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, again, "I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much for the confidence. I look forward to helping you build your daughter's college fund." Those are the sort of emotional words that you want to include in there that are really going to go a long way towards ingratiating you to the client. And finally, number three, I want you to take responsibility that the product is fulfilled exactly as you promised, and that your customer remains satisfied long after the sale is made. Again, if anything negative happens to them or any problems arise, which often does happen after you close a sale, make sure you're the one that follows up with them. Don't just say, here's the customer service number and good luck, call me if you have any problems. You're the guy that sees things through for them and holds their hand every step of the way, and you're glad to do it. Now, let's move on to some really critical stuff here. And I've said this before, and I want to hammer it home yet again, and that is that it costs a hell of a lot more money to actually get a new customer than to service existing ones. So when you actually do get one, you want to protect that relationship and cherish it and make sure that it grows. So here are 6 strategies that will help you magnify your sales results in a huge way by taking virtually every prospect you close and turning them into a customer for life. And by the way, part of this is also knowing what not to do. See, there are certain things that if you do them as a salesperson or as a sales manager, it will completely screw up your business. It's the worst thing you could ever do as a broker, whether it's for insurance, real estate, stocks, if you're a financial planner, whatever it is you're selling. Don't duck calls when the going gets bad. One duck call and the relationship will never, ever be the same again. And here's the thing, people will always accept bad news. What they will not accept is not being able to get in touch with you when there's bad news pending. In other words, when you're in that situation when you know something's wrong and they know something's wrong and they can't get in touch with you because you're ducking that call, that is absolute death for you as a salesman. And even worse, when you duck a phone call, not only do you look bad, but you make your company look bad as well. It's literally the cardinal sin for all salespeople. And just so you know, back in the day when I was running my massive brokerage firm, and I've always said I was doing things the wrong way, not the most ethical way, so I had a ton of customer complaints. I always made sure, no matter how bad things got, every single broker returned their clients' calls, because I knew if they didn't, it would end up resulting in a customer complaint. And now, when I'm hired by a company to train the sales force, the first policy I institute is that under no circumstances can a salesperson duck a phone call. I'll say it 9 times throughout the training and hammer it home again and again and again, because ducking a phone call is literally the most destructive thing you can do when it comes to building a long-term relationship with your client. Once you do it, the relationship will never, ever be the same again. Now, number 2, and this is an interesting one here, and you got to be careful with it, so do what makes sense here, but don't be totally against sending your customer to your competitor. See, if you can actually help your customer and you have a competitor who can, then don't be completely against sending them to your competitor. If you do that, you'll develop massive reciprocity. It's amazing goodwill, and it'll be the start of really you being viewed as a resource for them to really help them get whatever it is they want. In other words, they go to you whether they're sure you have it or not, because they know that if you don't have it, you'll send them to someone else who does have it. So that's really how you develop a long-term relationship with the client. So you can send them to your competitor if it makes sense. It's like in the movie Miracle on 34th Street. One of the things that happens in that movie is that Macy's, a huge department store, has a Santa. And the Santa tells a mother that she can buy the skates her child wants at Christmas at Gimbel's, which is Macy's #1 competitor, because in fact, Macy's doesn't carry skates. Now, of course, the executives at Macy's are initially furious, but the story of the generosity of Macy's spreads like wildfire, and ultimately the heads of Macy's and Gimbel end up shaking hands, creating this great relationship, and on, right? So the point is that this whole process ended up giving Macy's so much positive publicity that it's far outweighed the value of that one single lost sale. Obviously, you got to be careful if you use this strategy, but it's something to think about depending on the situation. Now, number 3, and I already talked about this before, and that is to write effective thank you notes. And I just want to discuss here the language that you want to use here. Just be careful not to make your thank you notes dry and coming from a logical place. In other words, let's say someone gave you a gift, right? You got a gift of candlesticks. You don't say, "Dear John, thanks for the candlesticks. See you later, pal, Jordan," right? You want to write, "Thank you so much for the lovely candlesticks. My wife absolutely adored them. We have them on our dining room table, and last week we had company over and they just commented how beautiful they were. I really, genuinely appreciate that. We adored them. Sincerely, Jordan." Now, that's an example just for a gift, but just notice that I came from an emotional perspective, not a dry, logical perspective. So make sure that when you're writing thank you notes to people, if they gave you a gift, or if there's any occasion you could just write a simple note, use that emotional language, words like "I loved," "I adored," "I genuinely," or "we truly like." Just make it so it elicits some sort of emotional response. Do not keep it dry and logical. Next, number 4, I want you to use your gifts correctly. You see, the worst thing you can do to someone is give them a gift that has no value to them. See, number 1, it shows that you don't really care. And 2, it shows you're just trying to bribe them, which is really not a good thing. Now, I want to tell you a story about this. Many, many years ago, when I was in the brokerage business, I had a massive monthly phone bill, about $500,000 a month. And I had this long-distance carrier that was always trying to bribe me to get my business. And one day, they sent me 4 tickets to a baseball game. Now, here's the deal. I hate baseball. So they sent me these 4 tickets. They have 0 value to me. Not only that, I'm like, they're trying to give me tickets. I bet you their prices are higher than the other guys, right? They have to bribe me to get my business. Now, if the guy would have given me tennis tickets, I love tennis, right? That would have gone a long way to getting business. So here's the deal. When I say use gifts correctly, what I'm saying is you better first find out what a person actually wants in their life. I mean, not in the business sense, but personally. In other words, it's called identifying their aliveness. What makes a person feel alive outside of work? And you give them a gift to fill that need. So for me, yeah, I'm not going to be turned on by baseball tickets, but I love tennis personally. Nothing to do with work. So give me a gift for that, and that goes a long way towards earning some business from me. Okay, an example would be a plumber. The worst gift you want to give a plumber is a wrench. You get it? You don't want to give a plumber a wrench to try to buy his loyalty. Let's say you're a supplier, don't give him a free wrench. You want to find out maybe if the plumber likes to fish or to hunt, and maybe get him a fishing magazine. So each month, the magazine shows up on his desk, right? And he's like, oh, wow, and it says, from so-and-so, your name is on there. Now, that's a gift that actually has value. But if you give a plumber a wrench, what does it do? It just reminds him of his business and actually turns the guy off. So be very, very careful with your gifts. You want to use them correctly. You want to make sure they relate to the person's personal life, not to their business life. And if you do this in the right way, it will go a long way towards earning someone's business, at least getting your foot in the door. And then it's up to you to actually take that opportunity and turn it into a closed sale. Now, here's number 5. Always give more than you pitch. What do I mean by this? Well, the last thing you want to do is overpromise and underdeliver. It's called the management of expectation. If you promise, and you deliver a lot of value, but not quite as much as you promised, you've set your customer up to essentially be ticked off at you. Instead, you want to underpromise and over-deliver. And what's important here is that you try your best to over-deliver, not take the easy way out. And again, there's going to be times where you promise and you can't deliver, but what matters is that in your heart, you always try to make sure that you manage expectation correctly. You want to under-promise and then do everything possible to over-deliver. If you do that, you're going to find yourself really going a long way to generating customers for life. Now, lastly, number 6, always leave your customer in a better place. Let me tell you what I mean by this. Sometimes, and it happens often, is that you sell your customer something, but you could actually sell them more of something. And if you sell them more of something, you'll make a bit of extra money and maybe meet your quota, but all of a sudden, what went from being a positive experience from the customer becomes a negative experience for the customer. You need to be very, very careful that after you're done with the sale, your customer ends up in a better spot than when he met you. This is the cardinal rule, really, in terms of ethics and integrity, is that every encounter between you and a customer should empower the customer. You don't want to sell customer things they don't need or essentially more of what they need. And if you do that, you'll find that over the long term, you're developing that relationship and you'll end up getting referrals and truly have a customer for life. Now, one last bonus tip here, and it's something I learned from internet marketing. When I was doing some business with some very big internet marketers, and they rely on having these lists of people, the massive lists of people. Sometimes 1 million people will be on a list. And it's a good friend of mine. He said to me, listen, here's the deal with a list of people. The money is not in your list. It's in the relationship with your list. Or else spammers would be the richest people in the world. See, it doesn't matter how many people are on your list. What matters is the relationship that you build with the people on those lists. So typically what most internet marketers do is they'll actually give out a lot of free gifts and free modules to any training sessions they have. And what happens is after they give out these free things to their clients, they develop massive reciprocity. And when they actually come to them with an offer, their results are much, much higher. They close a lot more people. So remember, the money is not in your list. It's in your relationship with your list. And this leads us to the next logical step, which is a system I created that will ensure that you leverage all those positive relationships you fostered into a massive, never-ending stream of customer referrals. The system has 6 simple steps, so we'll start with number 1, which is you need to set a clear target for the number of referrals you want, and then measure your results on a consistent basis. Now, you've all been through the module on prospecting by now, so you understand the power of the sales funnel, and that since sales is basically a numbers game, we need to keep track of our sales funnel by working backwards. In other words, you essentially reverse engineer your referral business the same way you do your sales funnel, by starting from the end, which in this case is how many referrals you want to get each month, and then you essentially work your way to the front, which is how many clients do I actually have to ask for referrals each month to get to that number. Make sense? In other words, you know all your ratios in the middle, so it allows you to backtrack from, hey, this is how many referrals I want to get each month. I have to ask, 10 times that number because I only get a 10% conversion rate. You get that? If you have any confusion about this, then go back to the prospecting module and review the section on the sales funnel. It's really simple stuff, yet it's really, really effective. Now let's move on to number 2, which has to do with when you're supposed to actually ask for a customer referral. Now the truth is, and this is not completely cut and dry by the way, but you have to be smart here and be a little bit intuitive as well. But one of the biggest mistakes that salesmen make is that they typically will ask for a referral very, very early in the game. In fact, right after they close the sale, as opposed to waiting a couple of days and then asking for the referral after you're checking in as part of your normal post-sale first touch point. And of course, you never know for sure what you're going to find at that point, right? They might still be skeptical about things. Maybe they have some questions about something, or they might even have a problem. But either way, what you need to remember here, and this is really powerful, is that it's a whole new relationship now because you're going to approach them from the position of being a trusted friend, not a salesperson. You're not calling them back to sell them something, but to see how things are and to make sure they're happy. You get that? See, this is the point where you can really, really get that goodwill established. If they have a question, then you answer it. And if they have a problem, then you do your best to solve it right on the spot yourself, and then you ask for the referral. And if you couldn't solve it yourself, then you bring them to someone who can, and you stay involved. You don't just simply pass the buck and say, yeah, I'll have someone from customer service call you back. Have a great day. Oh, by the way, anyone you can refer me to? If you do that, the only thing you'll probably get is a really quick click in your ear, okay? So again, in that situation, the best thing to do is direct them to the person who can actually solve their problem while staying involved as much as possible. And then, once things are back on track, then you ask for the referral. Make sense? It's very powerful. If you do that, the amount of goodwill you establish is staggering. And by the way, there are, of course, exceptions to the rule about waiting for this first touch point. Remember I said you need to be intuitive and a bit flexible? If you happen to be in super tight rapport with someone right after you close the sale and the opportunity presents itself automatically, meaning it's not initiated by you, then go for it. Ask for the referral right on the spot, and if you get 1 or 2, excellent. But if you don't push. You'll have another chance in 3 or 4 days when you call them back as part of that normal post-sale first touch point, and you ask them again then, and believe me, your numbers will go up dramatically. Now, here's number 3, okay? I want you to explain to your customers exactly what type of clients you're looking for. Don't just assume that they know who to refer to you. Lay out the criteria of exactly who it is you're looking for so they can lead you to the exact right people. This is really crucial, by the way. It'll save you a ton of time, okay? Now, number 4, when they actually give you a referral, I want you to ask them for an introduction rather than just contact information. See, if you can get your client to actually introduce you through a letter, even better yet, a phone call, it's going to have a lot more power than they just receive a blind phone call from you saying you referred to them by Mr. So-and-so. just gives you that much more credibility, and of course your conversion rate will go that much higher. And also it allows you to maintain some degree of control over what the client says about you and your product. So essentially you go into the conversation really having a good knowledge base of what this potential customer is about. Now, number 5, I want you to remember the power of language. Now, I might sound like a broken record here, but language is everything. It creates meaning, and next to tonality, it's the single most powerful tool you have to control the conversation. Okay, and there are certain words here that are really proven to be far more effective in getting referrals. Number 1 is I want you to use the word introduce me to versus refer me to. When you say refer me to, it sort of has this sales, money being exchanged connotation versus an introduction is more of a friend to a friend. Number 2 is I want you to use the word help as opposed to service. Do you know someone who could use my service? Or do you have any friends I can help? When you use the word help, again, it takes away the business-like attitude that goes along with giving a referral, and it makes it more like, a friend trying to help a friend. Now, lastly, number 3, I want you to ask them if they know any friends, family, or neighbors. Use those 3 categories in one sentence, because it tends to almost embarrass someone into action. If they were on the cusp of giving you a referral and they were maybe, searching their database but not that deeply, and you say friends, family, neighbors, well, it's pretty tough for them to say they don't even know a single one of those people to refer you. Essentially, you're forcing them to jog their own memory by throwing out a very wide net to them. You're just easing them very slightly down the road. Don't get pushy here. So come on, friends, family, neighbors. Say, any friends, family, neighbors that you think I could help with, this program I have here, or this product, or whatever it might be. You get it? So friends, family, neighbors, okay, in one sentence. And then lastly, here's number 6 in the system. I want you to be rewarding your customers and thanking them for their support. Now, if your company doesn't have some type of referral program already in place, ask them about starting one, or ask your manager if it's okay to incentivize people yourself directly if they refer customers to you. It can be the difference between success and failure in your business, especially when it comes to dealing with professionals like lawyers and accountants and financial planners, where they expect to get something in return, and often rightfully so, if it's customary and legal in their industry. And I mention legal only because there are certain industries, like the legal industry, where referral fees are heavily regulated and can be considered illegal kickbacks if done the wrong way. So again, just be careful and check with your manager to find out exactly what your boundaries are and then operate within them. Now that said, very often the most powerful thing you can do is to simply send a sincere thank you note to let your client know how much it means to you to have their trust and support. A handwritten, sincere thank you note trumps everything. Except if you have a really, really, money-hungry professional, then you got to do that as well. So I want you to be sure to use these 6 simple steps to get as many referrals as you possibly can, because referrals can and should be the lifeblood of your business. They're the best way to ensure that you never have to wonder where your next piece of major business is coming from in the future. So in closing, if I were to sum up what this system is really all about at its most fundamental level, I would say there's really one simple concept that everything else is built on, and it's called preparedness. Have you ever read the book or heard about the book Sun Tzu, The Art of War? Well, one of the basic tenets in that book is that every battle is won before it's ever fought. Well, that's exactly what the straight line system is all about. It's about being perfectly prepared for every possible eventuality and knowing exactly what you're going to do next. It's about knowing your scripts and your pattern. It's about identifying needs, qualifying the right way by asking the exact right questions from big picture down to the specifics, right? And if there's pain, you dig it out and amplify it if necessary. And you keep looping around and building the prospect up on the 3 10s as you ask for the order calmly and elegantly, and of course without pressure. 10, 10, 10, and you keep asking for that order, and you will close everybody who's closable that way. And the most important thing to remember with the system is that good enough factor. See, even if you just implement a few of the distinctions of the straight line system, you will see your closing rate ramp up dramatically. So take the next 60 days as you're learning this and stretch yourself. Work harder, make more calls, go out there and really give it your all. And once you've mastered this system, it's become a part of you, the true beauty of it is that it will translate to virtually every aspect of your life. And of course, you can only use this system ethically for the right reasons. See, it's an extremely powerful system. I've said this many times, and I want to say it again. It's extremely important that you don't use it to get people to do things that they should not do, to buy things they should not buy. This is about ethical persuasion, which means influencing people to do the things that they should be doing to make their lives better. Anything else is simply not acceptable. But when this system is used to influence the right people, you will not only dramatically increase your sales results, but you'll make a huge difference in the quality of their lives. You can help people move past the barriers and the obstacles that have stopped them from getting what they want in life in the past. And that's my goal for you as well, to use the skills that I'm giving you here so you can get what you want out of life and not be a creature of circumstance, but be a creator of circumstance. All the success you've ever dreamed of is just waiting for you to reach out and grab it. So it's up to you to take the next step. I look forward to hearing your major stories of success. Hey, welcome back again. Listen, I'm really excited for this module right now because if there's one thing in my life I'm about, it's how to get the best result in the shortest possible period of time. Listen, I hate wasting my own time, and I'm sure you hate wasting yours as well. What you're going to discover in this module is how to make sure that you're spending your time on the people who matter and who both want and need your product or service. This is about prospecting, the science of targeting your ideal buyers. Now, you probably heard me say the straight line isn't about closing everybody because there are some people who simply aren't closable and then others who simply shouldn't be closed. What this is about is making sure you're talking to the right people and then getting those people who are on the fence, the ones who were reserved only for the very best salespeople up until now, get those people to say yes. And it all starts with prospecting. So before I begin, I want to debunk a couple of myths here. Myth number one is that you qualify and then you're done, meaning you only qualify in the beginning. Fact of the matter is you're always qualifying. You're constantly asking questions, constantly gathering intelligence and working to uncover the important stuff that you need to know to close the sale, not the smoke screens that you typically get in the beginning when someone first opens up their mouth. Now, the other myth is that prospecting is only about qualifying in terms of whether or not they need your product or they have money and so on, right? This is only a very small part of the equation. The bigger part of the equation is identifying not only your prospects' needs, but also their beliefs, their values, their past experience with other salespeople, and of course, pinpointing their pain. And you're doing all of that while you're getting into this ultra-tight rapport with them on both a conscious and an unconscious level, and of course, using tonality to do that. See, what I mean by this is that if you're doing a good job, when you're done qualifying someone, you've been doing two things. Number one, you've built massive rapport with them on both a conscious and an unconscious level. And two, you've completely, exhaustively gathered as much intelligence as you need, which includes, number one, identifying their needs, two, uncovering exactly where their pain is, and of course, amplifying it if necessary, and then all the other stuff we talked about, beliefs, values, and everything else that you might ever need to know to really get to that point where you can close the sale. Now, remember, if you're just focused on money, like, can they afford my product, you've done yourself a huge disservice. Okay, this is simply just one part of the sale, to ask about money if they qualify. Prospecting is just not something that you rush. It's something you take your time with. And in fact, if you're truly an expert in your field, you're not only entitled to ask questions, but you're basically obligated to find out what someone's needs are, where their pain is. I mean, how can you sell someone something if you really don't know what their exact needs are and where their exact pain lies? That's the higher level of qualifying. And you need to do all of that and build massive rapport along the way. So you can qualify someone and be the interrogator, which is what a lot of people do and it's wrong, or you can qualify someone from the position of the trusted advisor, the friend, someone who's there to tailor a product, an idea to help them get what they want to directly fill their needs and to suit them pretty much in every way. And if you do your job here and the prospect truly feels that you understand them, that you care about their needs, and that your desire to closing is just secondary, then the fact is that closing
becomes a hell of a lot easier. Let me get specific here just in terms of prospecting. I'm going to tell you exactly what prospecting is all about and what it is that you're actually going to be doing here. But here's the thing. Prospectors, real prospectors, like gold prospectors, they do this alluvial mining in a stream where they're actually sifting for gold in a stream, right? They're sitting there with a pen, they're sifting through countless thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, and they're sifting and they're sifting and they're sifting through the water, and they're looking for that one nugget of gold amid like those countless thousands of gallons of water, right? What they're not doing is they're not sifting through the water and hoping that if they go through enough water, they'll eventually turn the water into gold. You understand that? You're not looking to turn water into gold. We're not alchemists. We're salespeople. We're influencers. We're visionaries. When you're prospecting, the biggest mistake that you can make is you try to use this sort of influence and tonality, all this other stuff that I'm teaching you, to turn non-buyers into buyers. There's people that would have never bought anyway. You're just going to force them into the system, right? You end up wasting your time. You load your pipeline with crap. Then you start to think, geez, I don't understand. I did all this straight line stuff, and it didn't work. I didn't close people. And the reason is because they were never buyers in the first place. Listen, at my brokerage firm, when I had these guys training in the straight line system, they were masters of it to the highest level. They can close pretty much anyone who was closable. And they were so well trained, but guess what? You know what their percentage of people they would close? It would be 1 out of 100 people they'd speak to. That was the actual percentage of closing. They might go through 250 leads, okay, and get from those 250 leads maybe 15 or 20 people that wanted to hear back from them again, and get maybe just 1 or 2 people at the end of the day. But from there, those numbers justified a massive, massive firm behind it. Okay, so again, it's not about you have to speak to everybody and close everybody. Everyone is not closable. Most people, in fact, who you speak to should probably be weeded out. Okay, and it's the ones that actually do qualify, that answer the questions in the way that actually says, yeah, okay, they can use my product, they need my product, and they're financially qualified. Bam, those are the ones that you bring down the pipeline through the straight line. Now, there are 2 sides of the equation here in most companies. You have marketing on one side and sales on the other. Marketing is what brings people into your sales funnel, and the sales is what actually closes people, what actually gets the order. So imagine we have a marketing campaign that's great, and it's bringing in lots and lots of people, and of course you want all these people to be as qualified as possible, but usually, no matter how good any marketing program is, they're not going to be 100% qualified. So what you do then is you prospect, you go through these people, they enter your sales funnel, and you sift out the ones who are potential buyers, your so-called nuggets of gold, the same way a prospector was sifting through water to get his nuggets of gold. Before I give you the nuts and bolts of prospecting, I want to just show you this concept, this visual concept here of how a salesperson actually chunks down their various activities day to day. And we have what's called your sales funnel here. Okay, now notice that the wide part of your funnel, this represents the number of people you start with, the actual potential prospects or number of dials you make, whatever it might be of your prospecting, right? The dials refers to how many people you can call or connect with that come into your sales funnel any given day, right? Then as you move down the funnel, you go from dials to actual connects. Then you go from connects and you get to appointments, right? You're trying to get someone on the phone to set an in-person appointment perhaps, right? Then from appointments, you end up actually sitting down, having those interviews, those in-person sits, right? And from those in-person appointments / interviews, you end up getting sales. And from there, you make a certain amount of money. Now, let me go back to the beginning again, and notice there, as you go down the funnel, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, right? You start off with lots of people to call, lots of people that came in through your marketing campaign, and as you begin calling these people, you might never get in touch with some of the prospects. It's just the nature of the business. You're going to always get in touch with fewer and fewer people as they get into your sales funnel. Or sometimes you can't get in touch with a person twice. You might get them on the phone once, but you can't get them back on the phone a second time. It's just the way it is, right? So what you have here, as you go down your sales funnel, numbers get lower and lower. For example, you might dial the phone 120 times in a week, right? Those are your outgoing calls. And from those calls, you might only connect with 40 people. And from those 40 people, you'll get maybe 8 appointments, just making up a number here as an average here, right? 8 appointments to see them in person. You have a shot of closing them, right? And this is on a 2-call system where you actually make the first call and then go back and try to close on the second call, right? And of those 8 appointments, a couple will probably cancel or simply not show up, right? So at the end of the day, you actually had 6 in-person sits or interviews where you actually could have a chance of closing this person, of doing some influence here, right? And of that, you might close a third. You might actually get 2 sales in a week. And if you're getting $2,000 net commission, this equates to $4,000 that you'd make per week, or approximately $200,000 per year. The point is that this is structured so that it all makes sense from the dials on down. But the way you actually do this is you work backwards. You reverse engineer to see how much money you want to make. See, the first thing you say to yourself is, okay, how much money really do I want to make each year? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. Start with the end in mind. And based on that, then you then figure out what your ratios are, and you work backwards. You figure out how many people you have to actually dial to get to that end point where, based on how they fall off along the way. And you keep track of all your ratios. How many people do I have to dial to actually get someone on the phone? And how many people am I actually going to get interviews with from those I speak to? You get it? You want to see what your actual percentages are. And once you know those, then you can know precisely how many dials you need to make each week to get the result you're after. Either you or an assistant or someone can actually track this stuff and simply make sure that you make 120 dials per week or new calls per week to get the exact amount of money that you want to make. It's extremely powerful once you know what your ratios are, what your numbers are here, and you work backwards to get exactly what you want. Now, when you have a chart like this, it's very important to keep track of these ratios for a period of time so you get some consistency to them, and then you know exactly what you could look for in terms of trends. And then when you see yourself falling into a slump, which all salespeople go through, you can look to see what needs to be changed. Why am I making less money? Is it that I'm not dialing the phone enough? Maybe my closing ratio has gone down. Maybe my presentation is a bit rusty. You could actually see where your problems are. And this is a very powerful tool once you know what your numbers are, because you can virtually guarantee the result you want by simply making more dials. Now let's get down to actual prospecting tactics here. Number one, when you come into contact with people, there are only 4 types of prospects you'll run into. These are what I call your buying archetypes, and we have a slide here for this. So let's say we have 100 people in your sales funnel. The first archetype are those who are your ready buyers, so what I call your buyers in heat. Now these are the people who are really, really anxious to buy. They're raring to go. They either have some pain they're feeling, or they have a big need for your product that has to be filled right away. They want to buy now, essentially, right? And of course, these are your best buyers. They're your easiest closers, right? Now, second, you have what are called your buyers who are still shopping around, or I like to call them buyers in power. In other words, they want to buy, and they have a need for your product. They're going to buy it. They intend to buy it, but they'll do it when they're good and ready. They're in a state of power. They're not feeling out of control. In fact, they're feeling empowered. Now, out of a group of 100 people, you'd probably have about 30 of those people who are these sort of buyers in power, and maybe about 20 people who are your buyers in heat. So 20 for your buyers in heat and 30 for your buyers in power, okay? Third, you have what I call your looky-loos, and these are the people who are kind of your curiosity seekers, and they're not people who are good buyers. They're sort of the tire kickers of the world. They're going to waste your time, and again, we call them looky-loos in the United States. It's a phrase that they just want to kind of look, and they're never going to buy for you, basically, right? And this is the reason why you might only close 2 or 3 out of 10 people, because actually some of those looky-loos had slipped into your pipeline, and you never had any shot of closing them. In other words, the more unqualified people you have in your pipeline like that, the lower your closing ratio is going to end up being. And lastly, the fourth buying archetype are the people who were simply dragged into your pipeline and would never do it. They've been dragged into a situation where they don't want to be. They're never going to buy from you. They don't want to be there in the first place, right? They were simply just dragged there. Now remember, when you prospect, you are not looking to take these sort of people and put them down the straight line. We want to eliminate them from the pipeline, get them out of the loop as soon as humanly possible. You want them out of your sales funnel. We want to make presentations only to the ones who we actually can close, which are the two first groups. Number one, your buyers in heat, of course, and secondly, your buyers who are in power. So to wrap this first part up, just make sure that you create your sales funnel, create your chart, and start keeping track of your ratios. It's a very, very powerful thing to do. And one last bit of warning here is that when you get these looky-loos in your pipeline, just don't put them in like this suspense file that you might call back one day because maybe they'll change their mind, they'll stop being looky-loos. Just remove those people once and for all, get them out of the pipeline, and focus on calling those people who truly have a shot of closing. Now, let's get specific here about qualifying. There are three things that are happening at the same time. First, and I've said this many different times, but let's dig deeper here. We'll talk about identifying needs. One of the biggest mistakes that salespeople make when they're identifying needs is they use their own preconceived notions about what a person might want or what they're thinking. They don't actually let the person talk and tell them what they want, what they need. Now, in fact, I've made this mistake myself. Let me tell you a story here. I got called, okay, I got an opportunity to train at a very, very big company here. I got the call and they wanted to interview me first, which is not that common for me. Typically, I just get booked, right? This is a very big Fortune 500 company. And I spoke to the head of sales and, we started talking. He goes, so Jordan, tell me, what is it that you got? I said, well, listen, I got the most effective close system and blah, blah, blah. Straight line, straight line, straight line, the whole thing. And he's like, oh, wow, great, Jordan. That sounds absolutely terrific. I'll let you know. Never heard back from the people. About 6 months later, I found out through a third party that actually it wasn't that they didn't like the straight line. They were looking for someone to give them more of a leadership seminar, like, inner game stuff, standards and beliefs, right? I was completely flying in the wrong direction. What I should have done was I should have said, well, listen, give me an idea. Tell me exactly what it is you're looking for. I have so many different strategies I teach, different ways of teaching it. Tell me what it is you're looking for. If there was 3 or 4 different things, tell me, number one, first, your outcome. What would be the most important outcome for you? And then put it back on the prospect and let him tell you what he needs. See, if you actually empower someone to tell you what it is they need, they'll give you the keys to the kingdom. They'll essentially give you what it takes to close them. So the mistake I made that day is I just went on my own map of what someone might need instead of actually what they did need. And the way I would have found that out was by asking the right questions. So that's the number one. Remember, identify those needs, and the way you do that is by asking questions. Remember, salespeople have to be amazing listeners and amazing question askers. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? I'm doing an awful lot of talking right now because it's a training exercise. But if I was selling you anything, trust me, I'd be doing a lot more listening and you'd be doing the talking. Because that's how I find out what it is you need. And then once I do have the information I need, what do? Boom, I tailor my presentation. I essentially laser guide it to exactly fill that need in a very elegant way, and then you look at me like, damn, this guy really knows, wow, he's on the ball. You get it? That's the higher level of prospecting. So again, the first key of prospecting is to find out what their needs are and, of course, what their whys are as well. Now, let's get specific here about qualifying. There are 3 things that are happening at the same time. First, and I've said this many different times, but let's dig deeper here. We'll talk about identifying needs. One of the biggest mistakes that salespeople make when they're identifying needs is they use their own preconceived notions about what a person might want or what they're thinking. They don't actually let the person talk and tell them what they want, what they need. Now, in fact, I've made this mistake myself. Let me tell you a story here. I got called, okay? I got an opportunity to train at a very, very big company here. I got the call and they wanted to interview me first, which is not, that common for me. Typically, I just get booked, right? This is a very big Fortune 500 company. And I spoke to the head of sales and, we started talking. He goes, so Jordan, tell me, what is it that you got? And I said, well, listen, I got the most effective closing system and blah, blah, blah. Straight line, straight line, straight line, the whole thing. And he's like, oh, wow, great, Jordan. That sounds absolutely terrific. I'll let you know. Never heard back from the people. About 6 months later, I found out through a third party that actually it wasn't that they didn't like the straight line. They were looking for someone to give them more of a leadership seminar, like, inner game stuff, standards and beliefs, right? I was completely flying in the wrong direction. What I should have done was I should have said, well, listen, give me an idea. Tell me exactly what it is you're looking for. I have so many different strategies I teach, different ways of teaching it. Tell me what it is you're looking for. There was 3 or 4 different things. Tell me, number one, first, your outcome. What will be the most important outcome for you? And then put it back on the prospect and let him tell you what he needs. See, if you actually empower someone to tell you what it is they need, they'll give you the keys to the kingdom. They'll essentially give you what it takes to close them. So the mistake I made that day is I just went on my own map of what someone might need instead of actually what they did need. And the way I would have found that out was by asking the right questions. So that's the number one. Remember, identify those needs, and the way you do that is by asking questions. Remember, salespeople have to be amazing listeners and amazing question askers. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? I'm doing an awful lot of talking right now because it's a training exercise. But if I was selling you anything, trust me, I'd be doing a lot more listening and you'd be doing the talking. Because that's how I find out what it is you need. And then once I do have the information I need, what do? Boom, I tailor my presentation. I essentially laser guide it to exactly fill that need in a very elegant way, and then you look at me like, damn, like this guy really knows, wow, he's on the ball. You get it? That's the higher level of prospecting. So again, the first key of prospecting is to find out what their needs are and of course what their whys are as well. Now, the second key of prospecting is to get yourself into massive rapport, or actually better said, to maintain and build massive rapport as you're actually qualifying someone. You see, what happens is this. You start off and you capture someone's imagination by sounding good, using those tonalities we spoke about, right, in your opening script. And they say, this guy sounds pretty interesting, so they want to open up to you, right, and hear some more. One of you want to see some information about what it is that you have to offer, right? Whatever your outcome is for the script, and we'll get into that later in the script building module. But then what happens is you transition from all of a sudden, sounding good to saying, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. And you say, how much money do you have in the bank? Or you might say, where do you live? Or how many sales do you have working for you? Who's your supplier right now? You start asking these invasive questions, right? And typically what happens is this. As you start to invade someone's privacy, you essentially start falling out of rapport. So you need to be very, very aware that as you qualify, that you tend to run this risk of, starting to drift out of rapport and into this realm where you're almost like the inquisitor. Okay, now again, if I had a graph here, let me show you a straight line graph here, right? Now you have the open and you have the close. Above and below the line, you have your boundaries, right? You get into immediate rapport on both a conscious and unconscious level, right? And now here we are, we're gathering intelligence. But remember, as we're gathering intelligence, we're not only maintaining rapport, we're also looking to continue to build rapport. Add on what's called the justifier, okay, which is essentially the reason why I'm asking them questions. So I would say, listen, just a couple of quick questions, sir, so I can best serve you. Or a couple of quick questions so I don't waste your time. That so is your justifier. Essentially, it's your reason why you're asking them questions, right? It's not you're just wasting their time. It's not for any just, underhanded reason. You're asking them questions so I don't waste your time or so I can best serve you, okay? So again, I would always use a justifier. And just to show you how powerful a justifier can be, I want to tell you a little story here. It's actually based on a study that was performed in the University of Arizona by a very, very well-known psychologist named Dr. Robert Cialdini. And what he did is he had this really interesting study where he had a copy machine in the library. It was a very busy machine. There was usually 4 or 5 people in front of it, right? And he had some students go up with a stack of papers and try to cut the line when there were 4 or 5 people at the copy machine, right? So what he did is he did this experiment. They waited till there was 4 people at the machine, right? People came up with a stack of papers. They said, "Excuse me, can I please cut the line?" And what they found was that 25% of the time, they would get compliance. People would actually let them cut the line simply because they asked. And that was essentially their baseline result. That if you just simply go up and ask people to cut the line 1 out of 4 times, 25% of the time, they'll let you cut the line. Next day, they went back there, different people online now, right? And they used what's called a justifier. Essentially, they came up with a reason why they had to cut the line. So instead of just saying, "Hey, can I cut the line?" they said, "Listen, I need to cut the line because I'm in a rush. I'm going to miss my class." Essentially, a justification about why you should let them cut the line. So watch what happens. They go back now, wait till there's 4 people on the line, and when there is, they come up to the front, say, "Excuse me, would you mind if I cut the line? Listen, I'm really in a rush. I need to make these copies. I'm going to miss my class." Guess what happened? 75% of the people let them cut the line. 300% increase in compliance just by using a justifier, by giving someone a reason why you need to do something. You understand this? Now let me just go one step further here. They figured, oh, maybe it's because it's a good reason, like it's really a valid reason why. Everyone can relate to that. They're all in college, right? I'm going to miss a class. So people say, okay, fine, do it. It makes sense. So they went back the next day, and they said, let's just come up with some ridiculous reason why. Just like say, I have to cut the line because I really have to. So next day, they went up there, 4 people on the line. They sent in their bowls, and they say, "Excuse me, do you mind if I cut the line? I really, really have to." Guess what percentage let them cut the line? 75%. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether it was a good reason or a bad reason. You just had a reason why. That's the power of justifiers. Okay? Now, actually, this little experiment goes on a bit longer, but I'm going to save it for the script building module because there's some stuff here with certain words that we use and trigger phrases that actually bypass the conscious mind. They go right to the unconscious mind, so you can simply circumvent the logic centers of people's brains. So we'll go through those when it comes to script building. But for right now, just understand the power of using justifiers. You would never just say, listen, a couple of quick questions. You'd say, listen, just a couple of quick questions so I don't waste your time, or a couple of quick questions so I could best serve you. So those are your first 2 keys to qualifying. First, to identify needs, and again, you want to do that in a way that goes just beyond basic needs, goes to ancillary needs, beliefs, values, and everything else, right? And to find out their why or their whys, okay? And number 2, make sure you use your justifiers so that you can gain compliance and also stay in rapport while you're gathering that intelligence versus falling out of rapport and being viewed as the sort of grand inquisitor that's sort of just looking to extract information. Remember, you're not an extractor of information. You are the trusted advisor, the trusted friend, the family physician who goes there and says, "Go, tell me what's wrong." And he takes out his pen and his paper, and he's like, That's your body language, your tonality. That's the positioning that you come from up here, that you're entitled to ask questions. You're literally obligated to ask questions because you need to find out exactly what their needs are, where their pain is, so you can help them solve it. And the third key to qualifying is you're uncovering their pain. And if necessary, you're actually amplifying their pain. Meaning if you hit their pain spot and they're sort of like in denial where they're like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it's really not a big deal that I'm feeling this. In other words, you want to dig deeper there. So what you say is, really, can you explain it to me a bit more? Tell me exactly how this thing's a thing or idea, how this is affecting your company right now, and how do you see this in 2 or 3 years from now? Do you think you'll be better off, or how's this going to be impacting your company in the future? See, if they just sort of give it to you in a way that they're not really feeling it viscerally, you keep asking them more questions. And you do it in a very offhanded way, in a way that shows, in fact, in a tone that shows that you really care. So you'd be like, oh, really? Oh, my gosh, wow. How is that affecting you? Oh, my gosh, it's those subtle tonalities, those little murmurs. Got it, yep, makes sense, yep, I see, wow, versus, let me tell you something, when I see a person qualifying like that, where they just ask questions, they're done. That person has lost any goodwill that they've accumulated. They've fallen completely, almost hopelessly out of rapport. Now they have to literally climb back up from this place of the Grand Inquisitor when they should be now built up as this, wow, look at this guy. He really cares about me. And it's not just your tone of voice, it's the way you ask the questions, the sort of flow in which you ask questions. We'll get to that later. Okay, but it's what you're perceived as like the doctor, the family physician, the expert who looks at them and says, got it. That's what they want to hear, not, You do that and you're done. It's a very, very different response that you'll get back. Now, that being said, what you're not going to do is try to actually solve their pain while you're qualifying. Do not fall into the trap of saying, oh, yeah, great, well, my product or my service, it'll fix that for you right now. Problem solved. Don't worry about it, pal. Then all of a sudden, what happens is you take this person who is feeling pain and you actually take them out of pain into feeling comfortable again, which is working against you completely. Thus, you want to be measuring your offer and whatever the price of your product is against this feeling of uncertainty and being in pain, right? And now what you've done is you've taken someone from pain to saying, oh, okay, great, you can solve it? Well, let me hear about your product. And all of a sudden you take them out of the emotional and put them in this pure logical mindset where they start analyzing your product feature by feature and benefit by benefit versus the emotional position where they just, wow, I'm in pain and you got the solution, I'll do it. Okay? That's why you do not want to take someone out of pain while you're qualifying. Let me give you a very, very powerful syntax here, the order in which you qualify. Number one, the first thing to do is you ask questions, right? And of course, you use your justifiers when you ask those questions. Number two, you get answers based on those questions, right? You get answers based on the questions that you ask. And step three is that you ask more questions based on those answers. You essentially exhaust lines of questioning based on the answers that you get. What you don't do is you don't get an answer, say, oh my God, wait, I got the perfect product for you. You try to sell them right there on the spot. And this is something, again, I see salespeople doing all the time when they qualify. They try to jump the gun, and they start saying how great and how wonderful their product is. And again, people simply just do not buy in that order. It's not the syntax of creating certainty, right? There's so many other variables that need to be addressed before you just jump the gun and start telling them how great your product is, okay? Syntax, again, one more time. You ask questions, right? You get answers from those questions, and of course you make mental notes based on those answers, right? You gather intelligence, that's your gathering process, and then you ask more questions in response to their answers, essentially exhausting a particular line of questioning, digging deeper if you have to, and anytime you see pain, this is your next step, you have to essentially ferret out the pain, and if they're in denial, you amplify it. And essentially, that is how you qualify. Use your justifier, you ask a question, make a mental note, don't try to solve pain, then move on to your next question, okay? And if you do that, you stay on this straight line of prospecting, bam, you will find yourself not only getting the right people into your pipeline, but you'll also find that when they're in there, you're in massive rapport with them. They have huge respect for you. There's this sort of emotional bond that's developed, and they really believe in their heart and their mind, which should be the truth, that you actually care. You're not one of these salespeople just looking to make a quick sale, stick and move, right? You're someone that's going to be there for the long term. So let's go through this in more detail now. Let's get specific here with the structure. Okay, now there are some basic core steps here we're going to go through. First, like everything else with the straight line, you have to do your homework in advance. In other words, know what your qualifying questions are and what your outcome for each question specifically is. In other words, write down the perfect set of questions and memorize them. Now, if you're one of those lucky people who's simply selling strictly by the phone, you can actually have your questions written down in sequence right in front of you. But if you can't, then listen, just do the work and you actually got to memorize your questions. And as you do this, make sure that you set your questions up in a logical chain. See, this is what a lot of salespeople miss. They tend to go all over the place and really don't follow this little logical question asking. So one of the first core rules here, number one, which stops you from going off into Pluto or Uranus, number one, you start off with big picture questions. That's the first thing you want to ask. You don't go to the specific first. You start with your big picture questions. So let me give you an example here of some really powerful big picture questions. And of course, you have to figure out which ones are exactly suited to your particular industry here. So the first big picture question would be, number one, what do you like or dislike with the current product you're using? Now that would work really well, for instance, if the person that you're prospecting has a product that's similar to yours or used something similar in the past, right? So by asking them what do they like or dislike with it, they'll simply tell you all the features, all the benefits that are important to them. They'll basically say, listen, I didn't like it for A, B, C, or D reason. So of course you know from that you better be very careful that when you're presenting your product, you don't frame it that it's just like the one they did not like, right? It's a very, very good example of a big picture question. Essentially what they'll do is they'll actually customize their product for you. They'll give you the keys to the kingdom of exactly what it is that they want, okay? Now, another big picture question would be, what would you change or improve with your current source? Now, imagine that one. Let's say they have a supplier already. This tells you where their pain is, what's wrong with the product they're currently using, okay? And it's very, very powerful here to see, where your client is frustrated and the things that are kind of getting under his fingernails right now in the moment. Third big picture question, what's your biggest headache with your current insurance company, your current IT provider, your current stockbroker, your current whatever it is? See, it doesn't matter what the product is here, but this is one of those big picture questions that identifies pain. And if they say to you, well, it's not really that big a deal, they try to minimize the pain, you can probe a bit deeper and you say, well, let me ask you a question, how has this impacted you in the past? And how do you see this going for you in the future? Do you see it getting better or worse? That's how you really start to amplify a person's pain. And again, people love to talk about their pain. They love to talk about their tale of woe. Give them a second, let them think about it, and believe me, they will start to tell you all about the things that are wrong in their life. Now, don't say to them, wow, so I see you got a lot of pain in your life there. Come on, tell me about your pain. I really want to know, what's your pain? What's your pain? Come on, give me some pain. If you do that, you've basically broken any rapport, you've destroyed any rapport that you've built up to this point, right? So remember, you'll use your tonality. So it's, so what's your biggest headache with? Tell me, I really want to know. It's not like, what's your biggest headache with that thing? Huh? So what's your biggest headache? And the unspoken words are, I'm really interested. I really do care. I'd really like to know. Again, with these questions here, it's always the tonality that carries the day, that either positions you as the grand inquisitor, who they want to knock over the head, or the trusted advisor, family friend, who is there to help them resolve their pain and put them on the road to pleasure. Okay? Another big picture question, number 4, what's your ultimate objective? Now, meaning, what are they really looking to accomplish here? And again, this is one that screwed me up, that when I talked about my experience where I didn't ask them what their goals were. In other words, I used my own map of the world to figure out what I thought they needed, okay, versus to figure out what they really did need by asking question. Remember, we think that what's important to us is what's important to everybody else. And the truth is that's really not the way the world works. What's important to you is not important to the next guy, right? Next, here's another great one. What would your ideal program be? If you could design this for yourself, what would it be? And again, now they'll start giving you all the nuts and bolts of what they want. This is really saying, hey, show me how to tailor my product to directly suit your needs. And remember, people will always pay more for something that's customized for them. So finding out what's important important to them, what all their little needs are, step by step, bam, that's really, really crucial, okay? Another big picture question here. Of all the factors you've mentioned so far, what's the most important one to you? Now what we're doing is we're establishing their hierarchy of needs. So they might have 3 or 4 or 5 different needs, but there's one overwhelming need that really trumps everything else. So again, this is a question that helps us identify their hierarchy of needs. And when you do this, it really positions you when you're running your loops later on. We're going to, again, go through that module later. When you're looping to understand really truly what is important most, second to most, third to most, bam, it's really the keys to the kingdom of influence. And this leads me to another great one, which is, have I asked about every detail that's important to you? This, have I left anything out? Sometimes when you say this, they'll be like, what? Like, they've never even heard it before. They're like, wow, like this is not your typical salesperson. What does that really say? It means that I care. Like, I really want to know. If I left anything out, anything else you'd like to tell me before I want to solve your problem, it's the expert's approach. Is there anything else I've left out? Anything you want to tell me? And when you do that right with the right tonality, you get into such tight rapport with somebody that by the time you're done with these big picture questions, you literally own them in terms of, in terms of the who's in control here and how you're positioned as an expert, sharp as a tack, all the things that really, really matter here. Okay? And again, what you don't want to be is one of these other salesmen who's just, a cliched, how much money you have in the bank, how long you've been in business for, what products do you need, blah, 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 and boom, before you know it, the person's already tuned out and your ability to influence has really been minimized to the point of absurdity. Now, real quick, I just want to focus on one last thing in terms of tonality here. Now, I've covered this in great detail in the tonality module, but every question you ask as you qualify, each one has its own specific tonality, and you have to practice this in advance. For example, when you ask someone, how long have you been thinking about becoming a trader? Let's say you want to sell someone a trading system, right? Say, so how long have you thinking about becoming a trader? Or, so tell me, how long are you thinking about becoming a trader? Not, how long have you been thinking about becoming a trader, or how long have you been thinking about becoming a trader? It's, so tell me, how long have you been thinking about becoming a trader? Notice the tonality says, I really want to know. It's like, I'm interested in what you're saying. So again, the tonality allows you to really chip away at the emotional part of the message, chip away at any core beliefs they might have, and it'll really allow you to be perceived for the caring person that you truly are. And in particular, be sure to ask your more invasive questions in a more of a, disarming or almost an apologetic tone, depending on what it is. So if I was going to say to someone, how much money do you have in your stock account? I wouldn't say, so, how much money do you have in your stock account? I'd say, so, how much money do you have in your stock account? Just a ballpark. Like, no big deal, just a ballpark. Okay, so I would always use this sort of disarming tone. Well, let's say I had a product I was selling, and it was, someone who was late on their mortgage or their credit cards. I was helping them get current. I wouldn't say, so tell me, how late are you in your mortgage right now, huh? Or, so what do you owe on your credit cards? Deadbeat. Like, you wouldn't use that sort of aggressive tone. I would say, so tell me, so how late are you on your mortgage right now? How many, 3, 4 months? Just a ballpark. Say, and how far behind? How about the credit cards? How much a problem with those? You see, the words don't even matter here. It's the tonality that saves the day. It says, I care, I'm real, I'm not like the other people who've called you. I'm special. I'm a person that really has your best interest at heart. One final key to qualifying is that when you're done asking your questions and you want to transition from qualifying into the body of your presentation, you want to have what I call an anchor phrase, which is something that basically you could say again and again and again. It's very generic and it just works every time. Now, for me, I always use, listen, well, based on everything you've just said to me, what I have here is definitely a perfect fit for you. I'll say that again. So my generic phrase is, listen, well, based on everything you just said to me, the program we have here is definitely a perfect fit for you. That's just simply my anchor. It allows me to transition from qualifying into the body of my presentation. And the way I do that is by saying, okay, so real quick, let me tell you about my product. It's A, B, and boom, I'm in the body of my presentation. Okay? One last recap here. Okay? A, I want you to write your questions down. Make sure you come with the perfect questions for your industry. It's A. B, I want you to make sure you figure out the precise tonalities that allow you to ask these questions and be perceived in the way you need to be perceived, which is the trusted advisor, as opposed to the grand inquisitor. 3, write down the order in which you're going to ask these questions. And again, big picture to small picture, right? D, remember that when you ask a question, you listen to the answer, you make mental notes, and you don't try to solve the pain right there. You make mental notes for later on, and also you might ask additional questions based on what they said. You don't try to solve their pain, right? And then finally, at the end, when you're done, you've asked all the questions and you've gotten the keys to the kingdom, essentially. They've told you what they need exactly, where their pain is exactly. And you kind of get a really good sense of what this person's all about. Then, and this is only if you think that you can truly help the person, if your product suits their needs, they can afford it, it's going to really help them out, right? Then you say, well, let me say this, based on everything you just said to me, what we have here is definitely a perfect fit for you. Real quick, let me tell you exactly what we have, and then boom, 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 we're in our main presentation. Okay? And that's essentially the keys to the kingdom of straight line prospecting. So write your questions down in the right order, the right tonality. If you do this and manage your sales funnel, your charts, all this sort of, these basic tools that just allow you essentially to tip the odds in your favor. They give you one leg up on everybody else around you because A, you're not going to be spending any time talking to unqualified people, right? Most people get eliminated out of the pipeline, the looky-loos, right? And the people who really just were dragged there in the first place, they're out of the pipeline, right? And B, the people who are in the pipeline and who you are talking to, they're qualified in a way that builds on the rapport you already created in that, initial pop of sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, expert in your field, right? You build on that, and you get yourself, by the time you're done, into such tight, lockstep rapport that when you actually do offer the solution, they're like, well, wow, they're open ears, they're zeroed into you, and that's why I have such a high closing rate. Because before I even open up my mouth to offer the solution, they're like, wow, this is a guy I connect with, I trust this guy, he really cares about me, and boom, when I come in and do my stuff on the back end, meaning go through a straight line pitch, lower action threshold, add on pain, do my looping, I truly can close anyone who's closable, and so will you. Just got to master the technique. See you next module.